All right. Our next speaker is Ed Schaefer. Ed is a positive and programmatic leader who applies lean and agile approaches to leadership, culture, change, strategy, systems, product, and design. He works with individuals, teams, and leaders across the organization to deliver better value sooner, safer, and happier. As a business agility and product coach, he's facilitated hundreds of workshops, meetings, coached dozens of teams, individuals, and experimented with countless ways of working. He's an organizer of the Tulsa Agile Practitioners, an Agile Denver Kanban community of practice meetup. Everybody give it up for Ed.
Make sure this is working. Can you hear me all right? Good on volume? We're going to get this set up. How's everybody doing so far? Thanks to our first. So for my intro slide, I manage map. Oh, am I? Okay, I'll talk a little closer. All right, so this is my personal map. If you see anything on here that's interesting to you, that's not related to software, or even if it is and you want to talk to me later about it, feel free to reach out. This should pretty good sense who I am on shot. So I used to work for a really long time, Fortune 300 financial institution, and I worked in their compliance legal services tech department. And we had a lot of software problems with different stakeholders who work in different domain space. And there was a lot of confusion that was in that confusion between terms. There was confusion about what was actually in the software. There was confusion about what was in the software and how that tied to the data that was in the database. And it really created a lot of problems. I relate heavily to talk because I and most people I worked with felt stressed and burnt out a lot of the time, trying to figure out what was happening in this software and what our stakeholders talk, what problems. It looked a lot like this. This is a drawing that a guy named Alberto Brandolini created, and he's big in driven design community. And I think this really clearly represents the problem that I was facing and that probably a lot of us are facing, right? Is we have information, but we don't have all of it. We have bits and pieces of it. There's certain people who understand it better than others. There's certain people who think they understand it, but then they disagree with someone else who thinks they understand it. We're missing big pieces of information. And as a result, when this happens, we deliver slowly and we deliver poorly, right? What we actually get out, not as good as. And this problem seems like something that we should have solved, right? We had lots of tools at our disposal and lots of knowledge that we could use. We had tools that would help us manage the work and the culture and the mindset because we were going through an agile transformation. We could do Scrum, we could do Kanban, we could even take things A for other. That's great. It doesn't help us solve this problem of not understanding, talking past each other in meetings, using the wrong terminology, or not in our code. We had other tools that helped us with code quality, right? We had extreme programming, behavior-driven development, clean code, refactoring, patterns, all sorts of stuff. Well, that helped us with make code development, but it still help us solve that problem of not understanding each other when we're talking about problems in meetings, trying to work the problem. And we had DevOps, kind of. I mean, this was early to us. We did have some semblance of type. We had DevOps about systems and but this still didn't. This is really tech operation. Well, what about product ownership, right? I have a lot of. That seems like a great set of probably help. Product management tools, they customer value and the priorities but they still don't get us to that point where what our stock is what we build code. Code. So I was looking for options. This problem that and ultimately what I found domain-driven design. Fortunate enough at the time there was a domain-driven design meetup in town. Started going. Got to learn great. Even a domain-driven design conference that was happening. First meetup. There's what I learned about domain-driven that it gives us tech, help build domain knowledge, help argue with examples, and it helps to understand words that are being used by our. It's not really a thing that you do. Test-driven development where we follow these. Not like Scrum where we have a framework. Really a way of thinking about software. So some of you here may have read this book. This is the Blue Book from Eric Evans. This is kind of the original Blue Book driven design. And a lot of people reference. And if you've read this, you might talk about these things. And the answer is no. Because first, this is a non-technical introduction to domain-driven design, and these are all technical concepts, patterns, and things that we do in the software. These are not part of domain-driven design. These practices are not what makes domain-driven design useful. Part of domain-driven design is fuzzy. Fuzzy language that we're trying to work through and understand better. But also, domain-driven design itself is fuzzy because it depends where we're working, what we're doing, on how we solve problems when we think. So for people who've never heard of domain-driven design, you're, okay, well, what is it? Well, I've simplified it down to these three core. I would domain-driven design is an approach to the development of software in which we focus on the core domain and the domain context. We explore using models, and that means that we collaboratively and develop creative with software and domain experts, and then we base. Last is that we use ubiquitous, not just using ubiquitous languages, develop and using within our. So let's explore these areas and try to understand them a little bit better. So the first one I said was we focus on core domain. I think what is behind this concept is this question: why does context? The context is the setting in which a word or statement that determines its meaning. Statements about a model can only be understood in context. So what does that look like? Well, this is no context. Read this. I'm not going to read it out loud. That might give it away. But I want you to get a picture in your head of what it is I want you to bring. All right, now what if I told you we were at a conference? Does that change the picture you had in your head? What if I told you we were at a restaurant? How about that? Two different contexts, same language means two completely different things. Let's look at another one. Open the chest. What do you think? You have a picture? Well, if I told you we're pirates or we're cleaning out a storage unit, pretty easy guess, right? Probably think it's something like this. But if I told you we were surgeons, that completely changes things. Again, the same word, different meaning. So context matters. So if I said the bar, no context, you don't know what I'm going to put up. But if I told you we were going to go get drinks, you know what I mean. If I said my friend has a daughter in a ballet class, no. If I said we're at a bank, or at a candy store. If I said I was a law student, might mean the bar exam. If I said I was a steelworker, I'd be meaning that. If we were in Florida, if we were in court, if we were in the military, or maybe we work in a clothing. We know, when you have that context, you know what that word means. But having context isn't always enough. Because what happens in software? If I said, I want you to edit the bar. There's like 6 or 8 different types of bars on here. We've got menu bars, title bars, scroll bars, status bars. The context isn't always enough. And we encounter this all the time in software, right? Maybe you have a sales contact and a support contact that you work with. They both and they both work with product. But in a sales context, a customer is someone we're trying to sell to. And in a support context, a customer is someone we've already sold to. Sales context, product, something. In a support context, it's something we're trying to support. So how do we solve this problem? Domain-driven design has a term that can help. The main one is domain. So a domain is a sphere of knowledge. And in most contexts, it's going to mean a company's overall. So Netflix, their entertainment. Amazon, their original domain was, but now they have multiple domains, cloud computing, and others. A domain consists of subdomains. It's always going to be multiple subdomains. Each subdomain represents a different part of the business. Subdomains by themselves aren't enough for a company to succeed, but they add up to the company's business domain, their overall. Now you might be looking at this and saying, great, that's useful terminology, but how do we group things together? How do we decide what's our domain and what's subdomain? How do we group concepts? This is a great visualization by a guy named Nick Toon, somebody I learned a lot of domain-driven design. And I said it was fuzzy earlier, and the reason it's fuzzy is because it depends. It depends on what's important and what you want to pay attention to. So with these different shapes, maybe we group them by shape. We want all the triangles together, all the circles, and all the squares. Or maybe we want the same colors. Or in this last example, maybe everything needs to be different. There's no right way to group a domain or a subdomain. It's just how we do it in the context that we're working that helps us to eliminate fuzzy. So I wanted to give sort of a practical example, but contextual. Thought, hey, pizza. Everybody's familiar with pizza, right? So let's focus on our context. We have a pizza restaurant. That's our domain. Our pizza. What are our subdomains? We have a whole lot of things that we do. So let's look. What are our subdomains and our domain boundaries? Well, maybe we say it's this. I don't know. This is just a first pass. This might not be right. If I worked with people who were focused on their core domain of a, they might correct me. But this gives us a sense of all the things that make up our pizza place. But what's our core domain? Anything related to making and pizza? Let's take a look. We've got, I think there's maybe 4 in this context that are most important for us to look at. It might be the dining area. They've got their own context. Inventory, they have their own context. The kitchen has a context, and delivery has a context. And in each of those contexts, they have the concept of a customer and the concept of an order. But they mean slightly different things in each of those. So knowing that this is our core domain, let's reorganize subdomains a little bit just to help us. So I kind of grouped them together, and I put our core domain more towards the center. And then domain-driven design has this concept called a bounded context. You may have heard before, and again, it's fuzzy. But generally, what we mean with bounded context is a subsystem that connects multiple subdomains within our domain. So we might say, maybe we say that a pizza oven is a bounded context because we have a conveyor belt style oven and it goes from the pizza construction area to the box order prep. Great. What other bounded context might we need to worry about? Well, maybe our wait people are actually managing the dining area based from where the orders in or whether they're ready to the dining area. And there's probably other places as well, but this seems to be the main area we want to focus on. Maybe we say delivery drivers are another type of bounded context because they're going to come and get the pizzas and then drive off, deliver them to somebody's house. That's outside of kind of our normal boundary. We don't normally go to house. And we have a bunch of other bounded contexts too. These are supporting bounded contexts. You might have an inventory management system, content management system, an order management system. And these all can give us an idea of what systems we have or what systems we might need. The thing about domains and subdomains and bounded context, they don't always need to be just inside of your organization. So maybe there's a new app out. They do food delivery. Not only do they do food delivery, they'll take some of this other stuff off our plate too. We don't really want to deal with marketing. We don't really want to deal with managing online ordering, and we don't really want to deal with delivery. Those aren't our core domain. They're not what we're great at. So maybe we manage this. Now we have a bounded context between us, this pizza delivery app company. Now pizza delivery for them, that's their whole domain. They might have us. They still have employees and payroll and things like that. But now we get rid of a bunch of things that we don't want to take care of or we don't want to deal with because they're not our domain. They're not what we specialize in. We let someone else have that focus. So I hope that helps you understand context, domains, subdomains, domain boundaries. That's focusing on the core domain. Let's take a look at exploring using models. I think the question behind this is, what are models and how do we use them? So a model is just a system of abstractions that describes selected aspects of a domain and can be used to solve problems related to that domain. Is this the world? No, right? Just a model of the world. Represents the world. This model accurate and useful? Depends on the context. If I'm a student who's learning geography, this is probably a really useful model. It helps me see where things are relative to one another. It gives me a shape of Earth. They're related. But if I'm sailing on a ship, or if I'm mining for precious, this model is not going to be very. How about this one? This is the Mercator projection map. So this isn't real. It's just a model. Is it useful? Heard about this model before. You may know that Greenland is not actually bigger than Africa. So this model is not an accurate representation of what Earth looks like, but it can be useful because this map, if you're navigating with a compass, this is going to be a useful model for you to figure out where you're going and how to get there. Because this is accurate with. So if we know that, we know our context and we know where this model is useful, we can decide when we use it, when we don't. Now the thing about models is sometimes it takes a bunch of models to represent something that's complex or something that we're trying to understand. None of these are real. None of these are human or human bodies. They're just lots of different models representing part. We've got organs, nervous system, cardiovascular, muscles. For a doctor, he might only need one of these. He might need two of them. Or someone might need all of them to do the work to do when dealing with the body. just have the model of the organs, you might need the nervous system too. And when we build, it takes a lot type of model. There's a land survey, architectural design. We have a blueprint, wiring diagram, plumbing diagram, many more. All of those things have to come together to actually build. You can't just take one of those models from it. One of the things to keep in mind about models is all models are wrong, but some are useful. This is one of my favorite quotes. You've seen me talk before. You might have seen this quote before. This is from George Locke. He was a British statistician. And all models are wrong. We just saw they're limited, but they can be useful. If you've seen this quote before, something that left off a lot of the quote continues, and he basically says us to learn how a model is useful, and more importantly, we need to know how the model is, and specifically how it's, so that we can mentally for those gaps in the model. So there's a ton of models that we use all the time in software development. These are just some. These are ones I picked from that are from the world of domain-driven design. Some of them you might use. Some of them you may have never seen. We've got onion architecture and UML, C4 diagrams, hexagonal architecture, sequence diagrams, event storming, to name a few. No one of these models is going to give you a complete picture of what your software does, how to build it, what stakeholders need. But if you use multiple of these and bring them together, suddenly you're looking. So going back to our pizza plate, what are some models that we might use at a pizza restaurant? Well, if you've ordered pizza online in the last 5 years, you've probably seen something like this. That's not a pizza. It's just a model of a pizza. But it helps us understand what we're actually getting and what it is that we're going to wind up. Gives us a visual instead of just. Here's another great model. What size is a large pizza? How many slices is it? Something like this, we get a much better sense of how a medium compares to a large, or how many slices we might get. So suddenly we understand the sizes of pizza better than we did before. I had to throw this in. This is Andolini's from in town. And I got a pizza from them, and I loved that they had this model right on the front of the box. If you get the giant 20-inch. They give you a model to show you that a 20-inch pizza is not the same as getting two 10-inch pizzas, and here's the math that we're going to show you. This is an awesome model. It tells me everything I need to know about how big this is going to be compared to other sizes of pizzas I've had, and it helps set my expectations. This might be more pizza than I thought it was. So that's why we explore using models and how those can be helpful. Let's take a look at ubiquitous language. I think the question behind this is really, why do semantics matter? So words and language, we have lots of communication, right? We have words, language, pictures, but we still often don't communicate very well. And there's an impact when our language doesn't clearly communicate intent. The ubiquitous language that's structured around the domain model, used by all team members within a bounded context to connect all the activities of the team with that. So let's see what happens when we have words, but we don't know the intent. You might get a sign like this. I know what all these words mean. And most of the order make, but N doesn't. So I understand the words, but I don't know what the intent of this sign really was. What about this? Elevator is out of service. Use the elevator. What do they mean? Do I use the elevator even though it's broken? Is there another elevator? I'm not sure. Maybe something's just missing here. Maybe. I might be being generous. Maybe this was a mistake. Someone just spaced out. Or maybe we don't know what they mean at all. Sandals only strictly enforced. No pants allowed. I don't know where this is or what point they're trying to make. Maybe it's a pool. I'm just guessing. Now what happens on the flip side? Maybe we actually underneath we have the shared intent, but we don't have the same language. Bone jaw. It's French for hello. Bonjour. He didn't have the word. He knew the intent, but didn't have the right word to get that intent across. And this happens in business too. Do you lemonade? This is a print shop. They mean laminate. We're both on the same page. We know what they want when we get past the miscommunication of the words. It's just the words that are holding us back. And I showed a bunch of examples, and you might be thinking, okay, there's some mistake. There's some dumb. This can have serious implications sometimes. What if you went to the doctor and you got a prescription and it said this? I would be pretty stressed out. Now, maybe the pharmacist should have caught this and not let it go through, or maybe but somebody who's not willing to go and ask or question what this means could have really negative ramifications of this. They don't know when to take it, take too much, could cause all sorts. And even when we know the context and we set up constraints that should make it really clear, mistakes still get. So maybe you want to go order a cake. And I just picked Costco's because I could find it online. And you fill out the cake, you call in because you don't have a chance to go in, and someone's going to listen to what you say, and they're going to write down your order for you. And the key thing is the writing on the cake. All these other fields, you're good to go. So what if we called in and we said, I want a cake that says best wishes Suzanne, and underneath that, we will miss you. So that's what they write down. And here's what we get. You might have seen these cake wrecks before. I think this is a great example. So clearly something was lost in translation from the person who wrote the request to the person who put it on the cake. Maybe we wanted to say 35 with an exclamation point, and then I asked, can you draw a unicorn? We'd really like a unicorn on there. And the guy goes, I don't know. Maybe the person who decorates can. So I'll jot it down. Can you draw a unicorn? And you get this. Or maybe you want to make a joke cake, but you want it to say congratulations. But I want it to be as small as we can make it so they can barely read it. Congratulations as small as possible. And you come back with that. Now the thing is, we joke about this all the time in software. All the time. I hear people making jokes and showing images that joke constantly. You might have seen this one before. It's funny, but it's true. We miscommunicate all the time. We misunderstand each other, and we build the wrong thing all the time. Or maybe you've seen this one before with the Mona Lisa. So it's a joke because it's true, because it happens to us all the time. So let's look at some examples of ubiquitous language in our pizza and where are some of the areas that might help us to have ubiquitous language. Well, the first thing that came to mind for me was topics. Have you ever encountered this? And this is actually from Andolini's. I was trying to find a good reference. They seemed good enough. They have 3 different types of pepperoni. If I don't know what this, like, what is cup and char, I know what it means because I called and asked them. But if you don't know what cup and char pepperoni is, you may not know what type of pepperoni to. Or sausage. Maybe you don't want hot sausage, or you don't want a spicy sausage. And this is what it says. How do you know what they mean? How do you know whether it's spicy or not? What type of jalapenos do you want? What type of tomatoes? And what does it mean when we say cheese or extra cheese? It can mean a lot of different things. So when we have the language, if I go to Andolini's now, I know what all these things mean because I asked them questions and I learned about what these specific things mean for them. But if you went somewhere else, maybe sliced tomatoes means something different. Maybe they slice them and then slice them again. Might not be exactly the same. And even going back to the models earlier of pizza sizes, I had 2 examples from 2 different places, and notice that a large means something different at one place than it does at the other place. So if I'm used to going to this bottom one and getting a 16-inch pizza as a large, and then I go to this one up top and order a large and wind up with a 14-inch, I'm going to be pretty disappointed. So it's really important for us to understand the language that we're using and what it means in the context that we're in. So that covers these 3 main pieces of domain-driven design, kind of these 3 core principles. And what we do when we kind of live these principles, try to apply them in our day-to-day, what happens? Our implementation becomes connected to this ever-evolving model. So we start by building a model, sharing understanding, and creating the beginnings of ubiquitous. We use that model to inform our design. New questions arise, things are discovered, and information is learned. That information is then added into the model, or we explore different models when we realize the one we were using didn't work the way we hoped it would. And that information is now updated in our understanding and gets clarified in our language. And the whole process repeats. So domain-driven design is really design that is informing everything else the team is doing and making the software just as beautiful and delightful as the UX and the marketing, all of the other experiences. And what happens is we go from this top pick where we think we understand and agree and then realize that we don't, to this bottom pick where we model and we talk about the language, and that informs our understanding, and we actually do have a shared picture in our head. And this drawing is from Jeff Patton, who made the user book, whoever read that. Now, some of you out there might be saying, I don't think this really applies to me. I work in a really complex space. I work in machine learning, AI, or event platforms, or some other type of platform. And in that case, the complexity is in the domain itself. There's complexity in the business itself. So the business concept, the logic, the rules, the way people interact, integrations with other systems, and the way those systems need to. Those are the pieces of complexity that we can address with domain-driven design. When complexity is in the domain itself, then driving design by modeling the domain deeply in the code is what domain-driven design talks about. And it's the most effective way to move forward. So why might you try domain-driven design? Maybe you work in a complex core domain. Maybe your company is exploring new domains, trying to find new areas to work in. Maybe you have a lot of complex subdomains that need to interact with each other and have data go back and forth between them, and it needs to be clear what it means. Maybe there's multiple layers of subdomains. Or maybe you have complex domain boundaries or complex cross-domain communication. Maybe your company is doing domain-driven architecture. I've seen companies that we're doing domain-driven architecture. We don't have domain-driven design terms and language and tools and concepts behind it to actually help them be successful. But I would say the biggest reason that you might try domain-driven design is nobody can know everything. And this is a way to help us understand each other better, take the knowledge you have, and share it with one another. Eric Evans, who coined the term domain-driven design, he says, the heart of software is its ability to solve domain-related problems for its user. All other features, vital though they may be, support this specific purpose. When the domain is complex, this is a difficult task, calling for the concentrated effort of talented and skilled people. Developers have to steep themselves in the domain to build up knowledge of the business. They must hone their modeling skills and master domain-driven design. So I want to give you 4 steps. I've thought about this a lot over the years, and I think I've boiled this down to 4 steps to help you get started with domain-driven design. Really apply it in your domain and your. The first step is humble curiosity. You might think you know what somebody means or what they're talking about. You still need to say, I don't know if I understand this. Can you help me understand? Number 2, start building that ubiquitous. Share the common language that we are cultivating and growing as we work. It's really important for you to understand the terms that are in your domain. That means you need to ask to understand the terms that are used, try to use them more often, and even try to use them if you're not sure what they mean. Because if I use a word incorrectly, someone will correct me. They will tell me that I'm using it wrong. I will now have learned something about what that term means and what that concept means. They will have also learned something about how it's not clear what that term and concept is. So that helps us use those not only more often, but more correctly and more ubiquitous. Everyone starts and what they mean. Next is modeling by example. So this is iterative, collaborative design. We work at a pretty high level of most of the time. We need to anchor those abstractions something. There's nothing worse than arguing with someone about just words that we're saying and then realizing later on we were arguing about the exact same thing. So if we use concrete examples, if we can learn to tell more stories and to get good at telling stories, if we can anchor what we're building to something real, something we can visualize and something we can point to, we can use modeling tools, strength, to help our thinking get to the outcomes that we're looking for. The last major step that you need to do is refine the model. To recognize when the model doesn't match the language or the understanding, and update the model to match. Every time we translate something in our head is an opportunity to improve our software, to improve our models, improve the way we communicate about them. Try different modeling because they help you think about things in different ways. As I said earlier, all models are wrong, but some models are useful. Every model is unique. It has constraints, helps solve certain problems other models might not be able to. So the more models we try, the more work best for us and the problems. So I want to leave you with some pointers on how you can learn more about domain-driven design and how you could get started with this. First, I just want to say it's not an all or nothing deal. You can apply the ideas from domain-driven design as much or as little as you feel is beneficial to the project, product, context you're working in. For some projects or efforts, you may only apply domain-driven design to the discovery work. For others, you might skip over strategic domain-driven design and just start modeling in the code and doing lightweight visualization. Don't feel pressured to over-apply domain-driven design. Just keep these thoughts approaches in your mind as you work, and it'll help progress. So if you're a fan of books, which I am, here's a ton of books. The ones on the top are kind of the oldest, the most dated at this point. I will say the blue book I found to be very complex, hard to read. Some people love it. Personally, it didn't really land for me. The reference guide is really great, super short. I actually love this Principles of Web API Design book. If you're building APIs or working in web APIs, you may want to check that out. It's got a lot of great approaches for how to think about that problem. And James Higginbotham has put out a lot of great. But all of these can help you to get started and find an approach that gets you in there. I'd also should have called this out separately, but Nick Kuhn, who wrote this book, he posts a ton on LinkedIn and other sources. He does a lot of videos and things. He is a really, really great resource for learning more about this. And mentioned Nick, there's a perfect transition into the domain-driven design starter modeling process. So this is available for free on GitHub. This is a great way to see how domain-driven design can be applied cohesively to different aspects of software development, from discovery to strategic to the technical of actually implementing code. Nick Kuhn is one of the major contributors to this, along with some other folks who I've had the opportunity to learn domain-driven design from. I find this website, I reference this constantly, and I started to build a slide that showed a bunch of tools after these, and the slide was impossible to read. But what I'll tell you is there's, I think, 40 different tools that they've identified as connecting to domain-driven design, and they've sort of categorized them into these groupings. So if you know we're having issues with aligning the business model and the user needs, pull this up, go see what tools are there, and see if one of those might help you move forward or help you unstick. I'll tell you, the main one here is going to be a business model canvas. So if you've never used that before, that might be a place to start. And there's tools for this whole process. So I really, really recommend this. There's lots of great notes on it. And if you do explore this, please let me know. I'd love to know how it goes for you. And so that's it. Thank you very much. If you'd like to get connected, LinkedIn is probably the best place for me. I don't really use that bird site anymore. My email address. And as we mentioned, I am an organizer for the Tulsa Agile practitioners. We meet on the first Monday at Base Camp here in Tulsa. And then I also am an organizer for the Agile Denver Kanban Community of Practice, which is the first Thursday those months online. So if you'd ever like to check them out, we'd love to have you there. So thank you very much.
Yes, let's give it up for Ed. All right, I'm gonna stand up here, not fall. Okay, we have a couple of questions for you. Let me pull out my phone so I can read them correctly.
Great.
It's
almost lunch.
It is almost lunch.
I'm glad mine's going into lunch after talking about pizza.
About ubiquitous language and the funny examples like bone jaw, have you heard of the term malapropism? Is there research on jargon and creating an in feeling when you know it, for better or worse? Terms to be like self-explanatory as opposed to having to explain the term before you're able to use it.
Yeah. Oh, that's a great question. I mean, when I think about it, I could see how having jargon could make you feel as part of the in-group, but I think in general, jargon is going to be exclusionary, right? It's going to keep people out, and it's going to prevent you from understanding things as well or clearly as you could. I know I do consulting now, and last year I've worked 17 different domain contexts that are all very different from one another. I go in and they talk a ton of jargon. And even if I think I know what they mean, a lot of times different organizations mean completely different things by it. So I would personally say steer away from jargon if you can. Probably going to help you out in the long run.
All right, here's a existential question for you.
Oh, okay.
What does agile mean to you?
What does agile mean to me? That's a good question. For me, agile is really about learning, and it's about kind of iteration, continuous approach. So I used to do a lot of mountaineering, climbing, Colorado Mountain Club, and we could plan, right? We could plan our trip, go look at maps, topos, decide our route, read trip reports, all sorts of stuff. But until we were actually right there, didn't know if a stream was going to be flooded or how exactly you were going to climb up something. To me, that is exactly what agility is that we try to plan as we can, and then we react to the changes that are occurring, and then we learn from those changes, we adjust the plan, and then we keep doing our best to make progress. Yeah.
All right, let's give another hand to Ed. Thank you so much.